In the early 20th century, a political earthquake just absolutely rocked the world. It brought down a dynasty that had lasted for centuries and literally redrew the map of the globe forever. We're talking, of course, about the Russian Revolution. It's one of the most important events in all of modern history. So let's dig in and figure out how a seemingly untouchable empire could just completely fall apart.
So how does a colossal power like the Russian Empire just collapse? I mean, does it come down to one single dramatic moment? Or maybe one terrible decision by a ruler? Well, as we're about to see, the real story is so much more complex. It's more like a slow burn, a buildup of pressure over decades, until the entire system just shatters.
And yeah, the answer is pretty fascinating. The collapse wasn't triggered by any one thing. Not at all. It was more like a perfect storm, a really lethal mix of political, social, and economic problems that all crashed together at the exact same moment.
To really understand this storm, we first have to look at the long-term weaknesses. We've got to examine the deep cracks that were already spreading through the very foundations of the Tsarist state, long before the final collapse.
Okay, so the first major crack was political. Think about it. While the rest of Europe was starting to experiment with democracy and new ideas, Russia was stuck in the past as an autocracy. All the power, and I mean all of it, was in the hands of one person, Tsar Nicholas II. This system was totally resistant to change, which created this huge, growing gap between the ruler and the people he ruled. And this contrast is just, wow, it's so striking. You have Russia clinging to this really outdated model of one person having absolute power, while the rest of Europe is building parliaments and figuring out how to share power. This left Russia politically isolated, and it made the whole regime incredibly brittle. And right underneath that political fragility was another massive crack. These social and economic divisions. Russian society was just profoundly unequal. You had this tiny, super wealthy elite that held all the power, while the huge majority of people were living in poverty.
And the reasons for all this anger were pretty clear. In the cities, you had a new industrial working class dealing with just brutal conditions and absolutely no rights. And out in the countryside, the peasants were technically free from serfdom, but they were still stuck in this endless cycle of debt. This widespread feeling of injustice, it was basically a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And that spark finally came in 1914, World War I. This war would be the catalyst, the thing that exposed every single weakness of the empire and pushed it way past the point of no return.
Now, this is a really crucial point. The war didn't create Russia's problems. What it did was act like a giant magnifying glass. It amplified every single issue that was already there, making them completely unbearable. The strain on the military, the economy, and just the people themselves, it was way too much for this fragile system to handle.
And this set off a devastating domino effect. First, you get the military defeats on the battlefield, which completely shattered morale and destroyed any faith people had left in the Tsar. Then, that failure at the front triggers a total economic collapse back home. With the supply chains broken, massive food shortages hit the cities, and that becomes the final straw, leading to huge protests and riots. The whole system was just imploding, with one piece knocking over the next.
And right into this chaos, a group emerges with a very clear, very powerful message. A message that just perfectly captured what millions of desperate people wanted to hear.
This group, of course, was the Bolsheviks, a radical socialist party led by Vladimir Lenin. Now, their real genius was in their ability to harness all that deep-seated anger from the workers and peasants and channel it into a focused political movement. They weren't just criticizing the old world. They were offering a clear blueprint for a brand new one.
And this was their slogan. It's honestly hard to overstate just how effective this was. Just 3 simple words that spoke directly to the 3 biggest sources of pain for the Russian people. Peace for the soldiers who were sick of the war, bread for the starving workers in the cities, and land for the peasants who had worked it for generations. It was the absolute right message at the exact right time.
So, when you put it all together, you've got a rigid political system that can't bend, a deeply divided society simmering with anger, and the devastating impact of a massive war. Well, you've got the perfect recipe for a revolution.
So here it is, the anatomy of the collapse. Those 3 core factors of that perfect storm. You had an outdated political system that couldn't adapt. You had deep social injustices that fueled all that rage. And you had the crushing strain of a catastrophic war. No single one of these was solely responsible. But together, they were absolutely fatal.
And the result was the total obliteration of the Tsarist Empire and the birth of something the world had never, ever seen before, the first communist state. It was the end of one entire era and the violent, chaotic beginning of another one that would go on to shape the rest of the 20th century.
Which leaves us with the big question, the one historians still debate today. We've seen all the ingredients of that perfect storm, but which one was the most critical? Was it the political rot of the autocracy? Was it the social powder keg of inequality? Or was it the external shock of the war that finally lit the fuse? Your answer to that says a whole lot about how you believe history is really made.